I've been a huge Star Wars fan ever since I was very young. And I've been a David Lynch fan for a lot less time than that because I think his movies would have terrified me as a kid. So when I recently found out that David Lynch almost directed a Star Wars movie, I was very surprised and kind of disappointed that it never happened. But here's the story of how David Lynch almost directed Return of the Jedi. So back in 1977, two very influential films came out, one being Star Wars, obviously a massive blockbuster film, written and directed mostly by George Lucas. The other movie, almost the total opposite of Star Wars, was Eraserhead, written and directed by David Lynch. Eraserhead, a black and white, surreal, artistic, nightmarish horror film, was obviously not going to reach the same kind of blockbuster status that Star Wars had. Each of these films, however, were major successes for their respective directors. George Lucas would of course go on to make a sequel to Star Wars, now The Empire Strikes Back. Lucas was also now thinking of Star Wars as a full series composed of multiple trilogies, and he wanted to continue making these movies, but also wanted to work on other projects. So Lucas ended up taking on the role of executive producer for The Empire Strikes Back. He and producer Gary Kurtz then had to find a new writer and director. They went through a few different writers and ended up settling with Lawrence Kasdan after Lucas was impressed by his work on Raiders of the Lost Ark. But choosing a director proved to be a bit more difficult. Lucas wanted a good director who would be able to provide their own creative input and bring their own style to the movie, but still understand that Lucas was ultimately in charge and basically anything that he said went. So after considering and meeting with several different directors, Lucas ended up choosing his old friend, Irvin Kershner, who was reluctant to direct at first. And that same year, David Lynch directed his second film, The Elephant Man, which ended up getting nominated for several Academy Awards, including Best Director, and George Lucas must have noticed because at some point around this time, he became a fan of David Lynch. But Lucas now wanted to work on the third Star Wars film, and he initially offered Irvin Kershner the chance to direct again, but Kershner turned it down pretty quickly. So Lucas then went to his good friend Steven Spielberg, and Spielberg very well could have directed the film, but he apparently wasn't allowed. Now, the details get a little fuzzy here, as this wasn't really supposed to be public information, but basically what is generally thought to have happened is that during Empire Strikes Back, Lucas was told by the Directors Guild that he had to include at least a writer and director credit at the beginning of the film, but Lucas refused. And if you actually watch any movies from before Star Wars, you'll notice that pretty much every studio-made movie has at least those two credits in the intro, whereas now, most big-budget movies relegate everything to the end. Lucas was the first mainstream filmmaker to really do this, and he got in trouble for it. After releasing the movie without the intro credits, Lucas was forced to either pay a fine of $250,000 or put the credits in the movie. He paid the fine for him and Kershner and promptly quit the Directors Guild. Spielberg, who was still a member of the guild, was then told he was not allowed to direct the Star Wars finale. So once again, Lucas had to find a new director. One of his next choices was David Cronenberg, who at that point had done almost exclusively body horror movies. So, interesting choice. But he said no as soon as he got the phone call from Lucasfilm. In his words, he said, "Well, I'm not used to doing other people's material." Then after a stunned silence, he just hung up. There was also Lamont Johnson, who I'll be honest, I was not familiar with at all. There's also not much information on whether he was actually contacted or just considered. But no matter what, he obviously did not direct and instead ended up directing a Star Wars ripoff that came out a week before Return of the Jedi. But now, of course, George Lucas wanted David Lynch. Lucas was apparently a big fan of Lynch's work, in particular Eraserhead. And after Lynch got that nomination for Best Director, Lucas apparently felt that he would be a good choice for Star Wars. And it might sound strange now, but I think George Lucas probably thought they had a lot in common at the time. They're both weird guys around the same age, and they both got their start doing weird indie art films, so I could definitely see them kind of getting along. So Lucas called up Lynch, who said he had next door to zero interest, but figured it couldn't hurt to meet up with Lucas anyway, since he had a lot of respect for Lucas, and again, Lucas had a lot of respect for Lynch. And now I think I'll just let David Lynch himself explain their meeting, because he describes it much better than I could.
You know, George is a guy that does what he loves, and I do what I love. The difference is what George loves makes hundreds of billions of dollars. So I thought I should go up and at least visit with him. And it was incredible. I had to go to this building in LA first and get special credit card, and I had to get special keys, and a letter came, and a map. And then I went into the airport, and I flew up, and then they had a rental car all ready for me, and this keys, and everything was set, and I was to drive to this place. And I came into an office, and there was George. And he talked with me for a little bit, and then he said, "I want to show you something." Now, right about in this time, I started getting a little bit of a headache. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. So he took me upstairs, and he showed me these things called Wookiees. And now this headache is getting stronger. And he showed me many animals and different things. Then he took me for a ride in his Ferrari for a lunch. And George is kind of short, so his seat was way back, and he was almost laying down in the car. We were flying through this little town up in Northern California. We went to a restaurant. Not that I don't like salad, but that's all they had was salad. Then I got a really, almost like a migraine headache. And I could hardly wait to get to home. And even before I got home, I kind of crawled into a phone booth and phoned my agent. I said, "There's no way, no way I can do this." He said, David, calm down. You don't have to do this." And so George, bless his heart, I told him on the phone the next day that he should direct it. It's his film. He invented everything about it. But he doesn't really love directing. And so someone else did direct that film. But I called my lawyer and told him that I wasn't going to do it. And he said, "You just lost, I don't know how many millions of dollars."
So David Lynch clearly did not direct Return of the Jedi, but I do wonder what things would have been like if he did. I'd imagine it would have been a much darker film, but I also don't know if George Lucas would have liked a darker direction. Lucas ended up hiring the British director Richard Marquand, and from what it sounds like, Lucas was on the set constantly and may have directed parts of the movie himself. And after passing on Return of the Jedi, Lynch was contacted by producer Dino De Laurentiis about making a movie based on the sci-fi novel Dune. Lynch read the book and ended up loving it, agreeing to direct the film. Ironically, although the book is not really all that similar to Star Wars, the film's producers felt that it could be Star Wars for adults. And David Lynch's Dune, which ended up as a complete mess, was often branded as a Star Wars ripoff after it came out. Lynch was not happy with the production or final cut of the film and pretty quickly disowned it, but recently expressed interest in taking another look at it. I still don't think he would go back to Star Wars, though.
I said, "There's no way, no way I can do this."
Thanks for watching. If you learned something, you should like the video and subscribe for more videos like this. I'll see you next time.
We're all very happy to be here tonight. First of all, I'd like to introduce my boys. This is Chucko, and this is Buster, and this is Pete. I'm David Lynch, and this is Bob, and this is Dan. And the boys wanted me to wish you peace and happiness. And these guys aren't just a bunch of goofballs. They know that there's plenty of suffering in the world, and they spent many years with little iron hooks in their backs up on Sunset Boulevard. And but they tell me that there's this all-pervading happiness underneath everything. And the more time I spend with them, the more I believe it. And so we wish you peace and happiness, and long live Eraserhead. Thanks a million.